So myself and my attorneys, we've talked to probably hundreds of people, and we've defended, I couldn't even tell you how many over the years, of folks just like you in real life defensive gun uses. Someone recently asked me, Tom, what's some unknown or rarely known things that you can share about what you've learned across all these years, all these cases? At any point in time, we have between about 8 to 15 defensive gun use cases. Guys, here's 4 things that I came up with that you should know, and I'm sure some of you do, so let's get into it. Number 1, road rage. It's super common that if you are privileged and fortunate enough to not live in, well, let's just call it a sketchy area, or work or life is not taking you in or through or immediately adjacent to super sketchy areas, then in my experience, one of the most likely ways that you or a loved one or someone you know is likely to end up as part of some sort of defensive gun use is because you're involved in some sort of road rage case. Someone cuts someone off, someone has some sort of traffic infraction, someone's honor's been infringed, and next thing you know, someone's pulling out a firearm, probably in an effort to, in their view, de-escalate, end what could be a very dangerous confrontation. They never pointed at anyone, and hey, all's well that ends well, right? Except it doesn't end there, because very frequently what happens is one of the people or someone calls the cops and they say that you pointed the gun at the other car, even though you genuinely never did. Cops show up, they wind up talking to different people, they figure out who's who, what, where, when, all that kind of good stuff. And basically what they come down to is, look, they both agreed that he had a gun. The other person's just taking it one step further and saying that he pointed at him. They practice the defensive practice of law enforcement. In other words, they're not going to be the ones to make a decision. They're just going to write up the reports about what people say, ship it off to the prosecutor. Prosecutor is going to practice the defensive practice of law. In other words, what if you are some sort of crazy person who then goes out after they are not charged with a crime, goes out and actually does shoot or kill someone? What's going to happen? Well, the media and everyone's going to blame them for not prosecuting you in this case. So, as the expression says, you can beat the rap, but you cannot beat the ride. So very, very frequently, you are going to be charged with something. Disorderly conduct, recklessly endangering safety, intentionally pointing. Whatever your particular state might be, very rarely, by the way, are there state brandishing charges, though some of them are out there. You're going to be hit with a combination of misdemeanors and possibly even a felony or two, stuck hiring a defense attorney, and of course, off to the criminal justice races you go. Very, very common road rage cases. People, if you're ever involved in a situation like this where someone is being reckless and crazy and you perhaps are very much in genuine, earnest fear for your safety and life, get off the freeway. Let the person keep going. Take the locals, or just jump back on in another minute or something like that. I'm not suggesting that that's fair, but unless you want to start paying 5 figures to an attorney and rolling your dice in the justice system lottery game, unfortunately, that's just what you're stuck doing. Number 2, shots are very, very rarely fired. Now, a lot of you are aware of the fact that there's peripherally out there a study that was once done, once upon a time, that found out that anytime you have a defensive gun use, we have to remember that we're characterizing this with a very wide umbrella. In other words, defensive gun use is where somebody, so to speak, clears leather or kydex. In other words, somebody has produced a firearm, they've introduced it to the situation as part of their defense. That does not necessarily mean as part of a defensive gun use that somebody's actually pointed at another person, fired, God forbid, a warning shot, or actually fired at, let alone hit someone, okay? Very rarely are shots ever actually fired. The studies that are out there generally say that about 92% of the time, when a good guy produces a firearm in self-defense, the bad guy runs out of there. Doesn't matter if we're talking about home invasion, a robbery, a mugging, whatever. The bad guy runs away. I can tell you that anecdotally, this absolutely washes and completely fits with what both myself and my attorneys see on a day in, day out, week in, week out basis. Very rarely are shots fired as part of a defensive gun use case. Very rarely. The vast majority of the time, You produce a firearm, you do so in a safe, trained, responsible, effective manner. The bad guy sees that, they are out of there. Let them go. Your objective is to survive, not put a bad guy in the ground. Guys, really quickly, be sure to hit that like button, and we have a really great quote of the day coming to you at the end from an author that, I'll be blunt, I've never heard of before. I just found them on the internet, so I'm curious to hear what some of you think about that. Also, let me know in the comment field down below which one of these four you thought was the most interesting, and the one that if you were to tell to your friend or neighbor, your loved one, which one's going to be the most important. And be sure to include, if you had a fifth one that I didn't quite make it to in this video, let me know down below. If we get enough good ones, maybe we'll make another video. Now back to the content. Number 3, the undiscovered continent of how many defensive gun use cases are never going to the police. Back in 2013, then President Barack Obama asked the Center for Disease Control to commission a study examining exactly how many times per year across the United States are firearms used in self-defense. The CDC, and you can read this report, it's out there, the CDC did a survey of studies, among other things, and they found that there's basically between about super low end, 500,000, super high end, 3 million. I'm sure I know there are other data points, both lower and higher than that, but somewhere between 500,000 to 3 million defensive gun uses per year. We do not have nearly that many criminal justice cases related to defensive gun uses going through the system. We do not have nearly that many 911 calls going through operators and everything else. So there's obviously a disconnect here. What is going on? Let me try to bridge this for you, because I'm one of the few people as a criminal defense attorney who talk to people who have been involved in a defensive gun use and they've chosen not to call 911, at least not at the time that they're calling me. Very frequently, the situation looks like this in my experience. They come from a bad neighborhood, the sort of neighborhood where you probably don't want to have the police showing up, taking a statement from you with their blue and red lights on. Everybody's looking at you, everybody's wondering what's going on, and so forth. They leave and you're still at home, not in handcuffs. In a lot of situations, a lot of neighborhoods, whether it's rural, suburban America, that's a traumatic situation, but it's not the end of the world. You go into some neighborhoods, particularly in urban America, that can open a lot of problems for you. That can spell a lot of trouble moving ahead, because suddenly, are you showing up and you're starting to look like some sort of snitch, some sort of rat in the neighborhood? What happens if there is some sort of arrest that comes from it? What happens if you could identify the person? Do you think this is going to help or hurt you? What do you think is going through those people's heads and brains when they're talking through with me on the phone their list of pros and cons about whether or not to call 911? The vast majority of the time, they basically end on this. Look, I was probably in a spot I shouldn't have been in, or I was out at a time I shouldn't have been in. Not all the time, but sometimes. And at the end of the day, my odds moving forward are going to be better if I just let this be than if I call it in and make a big thing of it with police. A lot of you are probably shocked by that. I think that's a rational calculation of self-preservation. And I get it. And it's never my job, even though they almost never hire. A couple times I've had people retain us, but it's never my job as an attorney to lean on people to call 911 in a situation like this. It's my job to basically be a sounding board, to answer questions about the law, and to listen to them kind of talk things through and maybe try to point out some things they hadn't thought of yet. I'm quite confident that a very small percentage of these people are actually contacting a defense attorney to talk through this. Very small percentage. But given how many of these people still do contact me, I've got a lot of data points for the fact that there is indeed an undiscovered continent of folks who go through horrible traumatic situations and have to use a firearm in self-defense, who never choose to call 911, who are showing up in these surveys, but are not showing up in the justice system. Number 4, people still talk to the cops after a defensive gun use, but it's getting better. If you go back 10 years ago, or even about 5 years ago, the overwhelming majority of folks who were unfortunate enough to be involved in a defensive gun use who came from good backgrounds, safe neighborhoods. In other words, they were not introduced to the ins and outs of the justice system. They had to use their firearm in self-defense. They then talked to the cops and gave them a full story about everything that happened as best as they could remember at that point in time, to the best of the ability of the detective or whoever it is that they were talking to ask the right questions, get the narrative out there, and record it all, whatever medium, written, audio, visual, you name it, that they had available to them at that point in time. I've seen cops below interviews ask only guilt-seeking questions, not innocence-seeking questions of, oh, so then you shot at them, never asking why did you shoot at them, just, oh, you did this, then you did that, then you did the next thing. And as a result, they converted what was a pretty clean-cut case of self-defense into what looked like an awful case of someone recklessly endangering another individual. You are gambling a lot if you choose to talk to the cops right then and there. And I can tell you, I'm not sure I have met, and I'm being careful when I think about this, but I'm not sure I have met a single member of law enforcement who, when the microphones are off and we're behind closed doors, are going to say you should absolutely talk to the cops right then and there, give them a full story. And keep in mind, when officers are involved in an OIS, an officer-involved shooting, they generally get 2 to 3 days and a lawyer before they make their statement. Why should you get any less? That's the bad news. People are still talking to the cops. The good news is that relative to the fact that it seemed like almost everyone talked to the cops 10 years ago, I would say there's a sizable minority who are no longer talking to the cops. People are getting acquainted thanks to YouTube, thanks to training courses, thanks to you name it that are out there. People are becoming familiar with the fact that, look, you were involved in 2 encounters. Both of them involve deadly force. The first one's the kinetic one in the street. In other words, surviving the bad guys. The second one is surviving the deadly justice system. And the reason why I call that a deadly force encounter is because if you don't show up for court, men with guns will come and get you to bring you to court. If you don't show up for your trial, men with guns will come to bring you to your trial. And if you get sentenced, men with guns will show up to bring you to fulfill your sentence. The justice system is absolutely a deadly force encounter. It's just a slow-moving deadly force encounter as compared to the one in the street. There's also at least a lot more rules that go into it, among a lot of other important differences. I'm not trying to equivocate the two. I'm just saying this. Be real about the fact that you're involved in 2 deadly force encounters. And if you choose to give a statement right then and there, likely exhausted, likely low blood sugar, don't know if you're on or off whatever medication it is that you take for blood pressure, heart, you name it at that point in time, you are putting yourselves at a massive material disadvantage that no law enforcement officer would do to not only themselves, but to them and their family if they, God forbid, were ever involved in a same or similar situation. Don't do that. Make the wise call. Get as much training and education up front, and then on the back end, if you need to make a statement, talk to your attorney first and do so in a controlled fashion. That way, everything gets out there. You're not gambling on whether or not the cop did the right thing, asked the right questions, wrote down the right answers, all that kind of stuff. Do it right if it must be done. Thanks for making it around to the very end. Before I reward you with our ever popular quote of the day, if you could, check out a link in our description box, also pinned in the comment field down below. Our sponsor for today is our law firm, Grieve Law. If you enjoy consuming legal education and tidbits like this, let us know by giving us a 5-star Google review. Keep in mind, this is the internet. 4 stars is kind of a failing grade, but appreciate getting your feedback. Of course, leaving reviews like this and helps out our firm, and also, of course, allows me to keep coming back here and giving you content like this. Again, if you like this sort of legal content, this sort of legal education and so forth, let, of course, myself and the firm know, because it goes back to supporting this kind of work and also supporting the efforts of the firm of bringing this kind of legal education and content directly to you, the consumer, and of course, in the courtroom. Now let's close with our ever popular quote of the day. Don't forget to hit that like button as well. This one comes from, and I apologize if I mispronounce their name, Nitya Prakash, quote, "If you are willing to abandon your principles for convenience or social acceptability, they are not your principles, they are your costume." A good one. And I hope you had a good day today. And of course, as always, I will see you in the next one. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.